The third conference on will be held in Sendai City, Miyagi Prefecture, from March 14th, 18th, including the UN member states delegations and representatives of international organizations and local governments. A total of more than 40,000 people are expected to join the conference. The conference will review the implementation of the Hyogo Framework for Action, which was adopted in 2005, and adopt the post-2015 framework. It will also discuss the experiences of and the lessons learned from the Great East Japan earthquake. For press accreditation and registration to the conference and its preparatory committee meetings, please refer to the handouts distributed at the reception. Please note that the early accreditation will be closed on March 1st. It is a great pleasure today to invite, prior to the conference, Ms. Margareta Wahlström, Special Representative of the UN Secretary General for Disaster Risk Reduction, and Mr. Kenichi Suganuma, Ambassador in charge of the World Conference. We will first hear an overview of the conference from Ms. Wahlström, and then Japan's efforts for disaster risk reduction from Ambassador Suganuma. The Q&A session will follow their presentations. Before we listen to what they have to say, please don't forget to turn your cell phones to silent mode. Thank you. Then Ms. Wahlström, please.
Thank you, and good afternoon. The third UN World Conference on Disaster Risk Reduction is also the third one that took place in Japan. The previous one was 1994 in Yokohama and 2005 in Kobe. So in the light of that, we'd like to particularly recognize the government of Japan, and for next time the people of Sendai, who continue to invite, host, and use these conferences also for sharing the considerable Japanese knowledge and experience of these conferences. So this is an official UN conference, which means that it has a very formal segment, and it has also a public forum that is largely organized by Japan, but will have many events that are joined up events between international and Japanese actors. So the 14th to 18th of March, in about a month's time now, 33 days, I think, 32 days, we open the conference, and it will bring a large number of people. We expect 6,000 to 8,000 people. Already today we have counted 14 heads of states and governments, 60 ministers, and as you can see from that, now there will be a fast-growing number of people, in fact, registering for the conference. And the purpose of this conference is to review the progress over the past 10 years in the implementation and use of the Hyogo Framework for Action, and how its priorities for action have led to change or not, as the case may be. The conference will also adopt a new framework that we have been for the past 2.5, nearly 3 years now. We've consulted around the world with communities, regionally, country-wise, and asked them, in the light of their experiences with disaster risk reduction, what is it that they really need to focus on as countries and communities, and what do they need support by an international framework for? What is it that needs to be pushed globally in order to assist them? So with this new framework that will guide our work for a period to come that may be 10 years, but it's more likely to be 15 years. As many of you can guess, there is a wish to make it coincide with the outcome of the discussions on the post-2015 development agenda, but it's not decided. So for the international national DRR communities, this is a really important event. This community doing very significant work as governments, as local governments, many advocates among parliamentarians, a huge mobilization in many community organizations, because it's an issue that they feel has not been given much sufficient attention. And this in spite of increasing frequency, loss of life, and cost to countries and communities. So what this community really hopes is that this conference will get the highest possible political attention, so that in the coming decade there can be more attention to, in fact, how to save money and lives instead of continue to pay for increasingly costly disasters, both in loss of life, money, but in instability, disruption, and many times also with political impact. I think what you have observed is in fact what is happening. We ask ourselves, are there really more disasters? Yes, there are. We can then proceed to say, why are there more disasters? You know, we are really trying to do away with the use of natural disasters. It's a very popular word. It's hard to do away from, but it's not so correct, because we can't really blame nature. It's the way we build societies, infrastructure, where we put our assets, that is the cause of the biggest losses. So we have to be a bit careful in the choice of words. So we're always talking about natural hazards. And I think the choices are quite clear. So the conference, I hope, will focus on what's the obstacles to make the knowledge use that we have, and what are the choices that countries do have. And it's a timely but difficult coincidence, of course, that 2015 also have the post-2015 development agenda, and at the end of the year, the COP21 that will decide on hopefully on an outcome on the climate, which now also is about nationally determined goals. And of course the link between adaptation to climate change and disaster risk is a very strong one in practice, in concrete terms. So these are things that will be discussed in Sendai in many sessions. The conference is structured in an intergovernmental segment, which is the segment that will ultimately decide on adopting the new draft framework. It's still in draft. The intergovernmental segment, in addition to the high-level segment with the country presentations, will also have high-level dialogues, multi-stakeholder dialogues, and ministerial roundtables, and 34 working sessions. In these working sessions, you will find, if you will come to Sendai, which I hope, you will find that they spend some of them assessing progress, what has happened till today, but most of them will in fact talk about the future. What do we do now? How do we apply our knowledge? Who needs to be involved? And where does it happen? A few of the important characteristics of the draft that is on the table now and already agreed, I'd like to highlight because they are successes. One is that health is included in this framework in a way it's never been before. Health in every way. It's epidemics, pandemics as a risk, but also health systems, community health, and emergency health. So these different aspects of health are new, and of course an important step forward. Secondly, a very strong focus on recognition of the importance of what goes on at local level, as we call it, local government, but communities also. How much can communities do to protect themselves better and their assets, and how much can local governments, you know, they can do a lot with an urbanized world of well over 50% in most part of the world. So their importance have been put forward. And fourthly, the recognition of how important the various social and stakeholder groups are to success. Of course, governments remain fully leading the work, but the importance of business, science, legislative, and social groups is fully recognized. So the whole discussion will be how to make better use of all these resources in society. So these are some of the new elements, not all, but I hope this will help to guide the work in the coming years. So I said that the negotiations are still going on. We have had many sessions in Geneva, 2 preparatory committees, and lots of negotiation. There's still work to do, and that work will be concluded in Sendai as of the 13th, the day before the conference. We will have the 3rd preparatory committee and continue the work on agreeing paragraph and the whole document. And I think you will anticipate that it will be ready by the 18th, of course. So as you realize from what I just said now, there will be all the owners of disaster risk reduction will be there, the practitioners, the people that really need this to be a success, they will be there. The public forum, which is organized primarily by Japan, but brings many people together, is, if you were in Kobe 10 years ago, this is many times bigger. And I think that's a sign of how the work on reducing disaster risk has managed to mobilize people around the world. So they will come there in very large numbers. Of course, the Japanese communities will be there. Another aspect that I'd just like to highlight here is that I think the importance of, and many people will be very interested in that, the experiences in the Tohoku area after the Great Eastern Japan earthquake, the disaster itself, but also the reconstruction, which is, of course, a critical part in an area that is low density population, a bit aged, and far from the biggest urban centers. How is it going? And I know that many participants look forward to join the many events that these communities are organizing, but also to understand better now, a few years after the very dramatic events, what is happening and how our community is moving on with their life. We will have, in addition to these formal events, the continued negotiations, the exchanges at the highest level among ministers and heads of states. There will be, of course, many other events. And I will just conclude by saying that we do hope that there will be a very important representation of media in Sendai during the whole conference. I'm sure you will happily come for the 2 first days when we have VIPs and VVIPs, but please stay with the communities until the end of the conference and get to know them, because that's where you will find a very, very rich group of people and experiences to share with. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Wahlström. Then I'd like to ask Ambassador Suganuma to make his part of presentations, please.
Thank you, Mr. Yauno, and thank you, Margareta, for the overall explanation about the conference. On my side, let me try to explain why Japan has decided to host the 3rd World UN Conference on Disaster Reduction, and what Japan attaches wants to achieve through this conference. As Margaret has pointed out, disasters in the past 10 years or 10 or 20 years continue to happen in a big scale in many parts of the world. Of course, if you are in Japan, you can see disaster everywhere periodically, but even in the world, this is a graph showing the trend of disaster impact from 2000 to 2012. The green line is the economic damage, and you can see dips in 2005. This is the Katrina hurricane, the Sichuan earthquake, and this is the Northeast Japan earthquake and tsunami. The second graph shows the number of affected people, and this is the drought affecting India and China in 2002, and you have a constant number of affected people. The third red graph shows the number of people killed in disaster, and you can also see a big peak when the Indian Ocean earthquake and tsunami happened in 2004. There is another one in 2008, the cyclone in Philippines, and then the one in Japan. So the total the total economic damage caused during this period amount to 1.7 trillion US dollar. The total number of affected people, 2.9 billion people, and 1.9 million killed. So what are the characteristics of these losses and impact? One thing we can say is that 90% of the victims are citizens of developing countries, which means that the brunt of the victim are the most vulnerable. The second characteristic is that the economic loss could be overwhelming. If you take, for instance, the damage that has affected Haiti by its earthquake in 2010, it is 1.2 times of its GDP. And you can see how much the economic loss in the previous graph has been increasing. And of course, the case of Japan is very special because we have a high GDP, but still you can see that the trend is going up and is becoming intolerable. So this means in international terms that these natural disasters could instantly wipe up the long-term development efforts that the world community has been trying to sustain. The third characteristics is that we know, particularly from Japanese experience, that disaster risk reduction is effective. And there is some calculation saying that $1 investment in disaster risk reduction can save $7 of recovery efforts. Let me show the experience of Japan. This is a graph showing the amount of investment Japan has been putting since this graph starts at 1963. And this is the absolute amount, but this graph shows the ratio, the percentage vis-a-vis the general account budget, the government budget. So you can see that it was pretty high, around 7 to 8% in the 60s, and has been declining, which means that in the early stage of the post-war period, Japan had spent 7 to 8% of its budget in DRR efforts. And this has been done in the very early stage of the economic development. And of course, because the economy grew bigger, the percentage is going down. Next slide, please. And this is the result. You can see that this is the number of casualties by natural disaster in Japan, and this is starting in 1945. you can see a clear trend of decline of casualty. Of course, the big special ones are still there, but in terms of average number of casualties, it's going down. So we believe that the investment we made in the early stage of the development has paid off. Next slide, please. This graph shows what is happening in the international communities as a whole. This shows that clearly the investment going to DRR is not enough. This is the amount of whole development assistance in the world, and only 2% is going to disaster-related activities. But within this 2%, you can see that 70% is going to emergency response, which means you do what you do after the disaster to try to rescue people. Only 3.6% is used for disaster prevention. And this is the actual reality. And this is why we think that the international community should redouble our efforts to mainstream the disaster-related, disaster risk reduction activity. So next slide, please. As I said, Japan is committed, because we have our own experience, to leading the international efforts for disaster risk reduction, because we know that it is effective and it has an impact. And this is why we have decided to host the Third World Conference. As Margareta has said, we have hosted the previous two conferences. The previous one has adopted a framework which is called Hyogo Framework for Action, which has been a kind of Bible for disaster risk manager in the past 10 years. We have to renew this framework, this time in Sendai. There is a discussion now about the post-2015 development agenda, which we need to decide within this year. And we are advocating that we should put clearly this disaster risk reduction in the next goal that we are discussing in the UN. So this is basically the same thing on the disaster risk reduction area. This is the Hyogo framework, and we should have a new framework. And this is the new international Millennium Agenda. This is the existing one, and we are advocating that we should have a new disaster risk reduction component in the new agenda. Among these issues, we think that three elements are important. First, the need to invest in disaster risk reduction from a long-term perspective. And this is actually reflecting what we have been doing in the post-war area. Now, disaster risk reduction investment needs a long-term perspective and sustained effort. Secondly, you need partnership between government, central government, local government, private sector, NGOs, international organization. Third, we need to build back better. What we are saying there is that, of course, everyone can understand that it's important to invest in disaster risk reduction, but it's not easy to, if you have an area that is vulnerable to disaster, it's not easy to wipe out the whole city and build a disaster-prone city if people are living in this place. So the best chance to have a good disaster prevention measure is after an earthquake or after a tsunami, after disaster happened. So this is what we are doing in the Tohoku region, and we are calling this notion build back better. So when you have a destruction, when people are affected, this is the best chance to build back better. So these are the three elements to which Japan attaches importance. Next slide, please. I think I've already said that we want to mainstream the disaster DRR to disseminate and share worldwide the Japanese experience and knowledge on disaster risk reduction, and to showcase to the world the experience and the state of recovery by the Great East Japan earthquake in 2011. And as you know, Sendai is a city that has been actually affected by the earthquake and tsunami. We also hope to be able to showcase some of the bilateral cooperation that we are doing in other countries to through Japanese ODA to reduce disaster risk. And can you next slide, please? This is an example in Thailand. So we have cooperated with Thailand in the construction of the subway in Bangkok. And as you know, Bangkok is a flood-prone city, and we have provided every entrance of this subway the resistance against water immersion as high as 3.5 meters. You also need ventilation hole for the subway platforms, and this is also resistant to flood as high as 3.5 to 5 meters. So this is one of the example of the Japanese knowledge being applied to developing countries in terms of disaster risk prevention. Next slide, please. This is the early warning system in Chile. As you know, Chile was hit by tsunami in 2010, and we had provided expertise on an early warning system, including the tsunami analysis system, before that happened, and the report says that it did avoid loss of lives from tsunami, which affected also Chile. I mean the Great East Japan earthquake that reached Chile afterwards, and it also correctly estimated the height of the tsunami which reached there. So this is an example which was actually applied after this project. There's another project in El Salvador. Education is very important. Education from an early stage, how to behave when the disaster happens, when tsunami comes, etc. And we had been transmitting this story of miracle in Kamaishi. This is a story during the Edo period when a leader of a village tried to rescue the villager, setting fire on one of the house and prompting people to go up the hill. And this has been applied to one of the hurricane Ida hit, and so on. So these are some of the example of the concrete project. So during this conference, we also hope to showcase some of the case and discuss how we can, from Sendai on, reach out and strengthen its cooperation in terms of concrete projects. I don't know if you have been in Sendai. It's about 1 hour and a half time by Shinkansen, northeast of Japan. It's a beautiful city, maybe a bit cold still in March, but lot of good spots around, onsen and good food. It has a castle in the center. So we would like to welcome you and the whole international community in Sendai. And of course, I hope to see you also in Sendai. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ambassador Suganuma. Now we would like to open the floor to questions. We will receive questions from the foreign press first, but one question at a time, please. If you have a question, please raise your hand, and if you are selected, please wait for a microphone and give us your name and affiliation before you ask your questions. Any question? Yes.
I'm Michio Ishida with Singapore's Channel News Asia. I would like to know the itinerary of the conference in Sendai. You mentioned that there will be intergovernmental segments, including ministerial sessions and working sessions. When will they actually happen? Thank you.
When will it actually happen? It will happen every day from the 14th of March. The 14th of March is the formal and official opening of the conference, which starts at 11 a.m. in the morning. And that opening ceremony will not be very long. The conference is a very formal opening by the appointment of the president of the conference, which will be the host country, a Japanese president. And then from there on, in that segment, the national, the speeches by the heads of delegations of all the countries that are there, and as per UN protocol, heads of states and governments speak first, and after them, ministers of foreign affairs, and after that, delegations on a first-come, first-served basis. So the speakers list is already open, so countries will have to register in the website that the UN has opened, which goes to the relevant department in New York who established the speakers list. After that, all the other sessions, the speeches will go on all through the week, depending on how many countries and other delegations wish to speak. But that means that there are a lot of hours, in principle 6 hours every day. At the same time, on Saturday, the other sessions start with the first high-level partnership dialogue, which is a panel with co-chairs, expert speakers, high-level speakers, having a dialogue with 500 to 1,000 people, depending on the size of the room. It's a 3-hour session, and of course intended to get a real conversation going about experiences, but also how cooperation is really a partnership. Working sessions start also. Working sessions are shorter sessions, about 1 hour, hour and a half each, on many different themes. And on Saturday afternoon, for example, there is a session on school safety, There is a session on early warning systems. There is a session on technological hazards. Every day has a bit of a theme, but there are 8 normally working sessions, 2 ministerial roundtables, and 1 high-level dialogue. The ministerial roundtables will start on Sunday, and that is a session, because of space, not really open to everyone, but they will be webcast, so they can be followed. And they have about 40 to 45 ministers. They have been asked to declare which table they wish to participate in, first, second, third priority. But there will also be 5 to 6 intergovernmental organizations, UN and civil society participants in these roundtables. So that's how the week will go until you reach Wednesday, when we have the closing session. And the closing session will be about adoption of the framework, adoption, of course, of the conference outcomes. That is also a formal event. And then after the closing, there will be also a less formal event to thank everyone for coming to the conference, to thank the host country. And around 1 o'clock, we hope we will close the conference on the 18th. So that's the week very quickly. These public forum events, the 360 events, will not take place in the conference perimeter, as by tradition that is UN territory during these days. They will take place in, I think it's 4 to 6 different locations in Sendai.
Thank you. I forgot to mention, so this is the main conference center where the UN conference will take place. It's about 20 minutes walk from the station, but there are many buildings within Sendai city where the public forum, exhibition, conference related to disaster risk reduction will take place, and there will be a bus touring regularly within these in between these buildings and the station. The program of the conference itself you can see in the UN website, and all the public fora and associated event. I think there's a dedicated website also made by the Secretariat in Sendai, hosted by Sendai City. There is also another venue near the airport, which is a big exhibition center, and there will be companies displaying technology to for disaster risk reductions. So you will have a lot of event all the time happening throughout this week.
Study tours.
Sorry?
Study tours.
Yeah, yeah. And for delegations, there are also many study tours organized, which will take them in the affected area nearby to visit the half-day tours, both half-day tours and full-day tours. They will be able to visit the site affected by the earthquake and tsunami, and see how the reconstruction is going on, and to talk to people, etc. So it will be a very interesting occasion too. Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, the lady.
Hi, my name is Naoko Miyaichi from British Embassy, Tokyo.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. I'd like to give priority to the foreign press people first.
Okay.
Any question from the press people? Yes.
My name is Kyoko Hasegawa with AFP. Is there any occasion for disaster victims to speak to high-level delegations, or are the public forum events totally independent from high-level meeting taking place? Thank you very much.
Yes. As I have mentioned, all these working sessions, first, as I said, the high-level dialogue has an audience of between, depending on how big the room is, 500 to 1,000 people. So any registered participant in the conference, and there are many civil society participants that are registered conference participants, and of course they are welcome, and I'm sure you will hear their voice. Similarly, in the working sessions that are smaller events, but the same participation. In fact, we mentioned a big number of participants for the conference. As you can imagine, it's not 6,000 or 8,000 government representatives that will come. The overwhelming majority, I think, will be other parts of society. And of course, we know that there will be many participants from many parts of the world, but also from this region. And I'm sure that this is, I don't know if you have access to this public forum handbook, you will see the nature of the events will be that many of them will really be driven by community actors. And I think they represent many of them people who have been affected themselves.
Any questions? Yes, Mr. Kunitel.
Siegfried Nidl, freelancer from Germany. Is there any discussion about how to deal with the reconstruction after the disaster? I think the example of rebuilding Tohoku area shows, and I think it happened in other disasters also, that if the rebuilding doesn't start a short time after disaster, it's much more difficult to rebuild, because there is a kind of a special kind of thinking on the people living in the area. They want to rebuild, and if they want to come together, and if this time frame is it's not happening in a short time, perhaps 2 years, then it will be much more difficult to deal with it. Is there a discussion about this?
Yes, very much so. In fact, we do have one big event in Sendai, particularly to give attention to the complexities, I like to say, with reconstruction, because everything changes. We are familiar with how a disaster is handled. When you go into reconstruction, you have different institutions, different time frames, different financing mechanisms, and very often different decision-making structures. So what you just related is a big dilemma everywhere in the world, rich and poor country. It's the tension between it has to be quick, but you have to consult. You have to be inclusive, but someone needs to be responsible. It's very expensive, and it's always full of frustration from every side. And not very long time ago, I saw a very interesting, simple 2 presentations in a neighboring country to Japan, but not Japan, where 2 countries from Asia presented their domestic experiences of reconstruction, both of them after earthquakes. And they both made the point that our plan is 10 years, not 3 years, not 2 years, it's 10 years. And in reality, if you go back and talk to people in Kobe today, in Maharashtra, in India, anywhere, 20 years after the disasters in these cases, people still feel that they are incomplete because of social havoc. We were just now in the commemorative event in Kobe, And the governor, who has been leading this work for a long time now, he says, we are not yet finished. We still have consequences of that earthquake that we have to deal with, people who are living in apartments that are not theirs. So I think not only deal with the issues, but also try to get a much better understanding that building back and building back better is a very different set of complexities that involves everyone, and we all have to create understanding for that. There's too little, I think, efforts to put together the lessons learned and try to generalize them for faster learning. I think many people carry around that knowledge, but it's not been as intensely studied as the disasters themselves. So that's what we hope will be the strong conclusion in Sendai, that we have to focus a lot more on reconstruction in order to minimize some of the challenges that you just highlighted.
Any other questions? Yes.
Okay. Is there a session, a nuclear disaster after the Fukushima crisis, this event? Thank you.
Nuclear disaster? Yes. Yes. Well, I think there will be, in fact, several sessions in the conference itself. I just mentioned it. There will be in fact, the first conversation we had about this was in our global platform meeting in 2011, where with Japan, of course, and a few other countries that at that time either had a very own experience, like Chernobyl, or feared that public opinion, of course, could turn against using nuclear energy for important power supply. So we started there, and now what we will have is a second session called Technological Hazards. Why technological hazards? Because, of course, the ones that are related to the dramas here in Fukushima are the ones that you all think about, but there are many other technologies that together with hazards can cause serious havoc in societies. Infrastructure, IT technology, chemical factories. We have many examples over the past decade or more where what seemed like a natural hazard event turned into something much more complicated. So this will be an effort to continue that discussion. And I think there is a very particular interest from many of the international participants that we have talked with to understand how do you recover from an event of this nature. So that may be part of the discussion. But I think there are also events organized, the study tours that Ambassador Suganuma mentioned. Several of them are in fact going to Fukushima Prefecture. And I'm sure that will raise interest. It's about how to recover the environment. And I think that's one, it's not all the aspects, but it's one of the important aspects of such experiences.
Any other questions? If there's no more questions from the foreign press, we'd like to receive questions from the embassy representatives. The lady from the British Embassy.
It is reported that Prime Minister Abe will attend the conference. Do you know which day he will be in Sendai attending conference?
As you know, maybe yesterday I had the privilege of meeting with the Prime Minister. In fact, both of us were there, and brief him about the conference preparations. Whether he will be there or not, we can only hope and encourage him. But clearly this is important for Japan and for the Prime Minister. So I hope he will be there. And I think you share that hope with me.
Yeah. He promised to do his best to be able to attend. So.
Okay, any other questions? Yes, gentleman over there.
Thank you. My name is Taona Awadi from Zimbabwe Embassy. I wanted to confirm, how many heads of state did you say have you already confirmed that attending the forthcoming conference? Heads of state?
So far 14.
Okay. Thank you.
Somewhere around.
Oh,
Yes.
thank you.
But we hope there will be 20 at least.
Any other questions? Yes, gentleman over there.
Yes, David Villagomez from the Embassy of Ecuador. We've been given here the Public Forum Guidebook. I was wondering, this document is in Japanese. Is there any English document available? We have to transmit this back to the capital, so they might not understand.
It's mixed English and Japanese.
It is, but nevertheless,
not enough English. Yes, yes.
They might reprehend us.
It's yours. Yes, there will be in full English version. Someone is nodding in the back. Yes. For the conference, it's a representative of the Cabinet Office. For the conference itself, we do have, it's in the printer now, but on our website there is also a handbook for the conference. So if you look in the, it's there.
Any other questions? If there's no more questions, I'd like to close today's session. Thank you very much, Ms. Wahlström and Ambassador Suganuma. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.